Welcome to the 5th part of Lesson 2 in the Thermal Mermaid Soap Makers course. This lesson is meant to be a beginner's level in cold process soap. In this episode, we're making a sea salt bar with brine water, and we'll be talking about some of the ways to add salt to your soap. This is the 5th part of a 10-part tutorial, and this is recipe number 4 in the series. We're still working with thick trace recipes, and adding salt will only thicken the batter, so like the recipes you've seen in 1 through 4, the design for this bar will work around the properties of the recipe. If you're enjoying this tutorial series, then be sure to hit the thumbs up button, and if you'd like to catch the next 5 recipes, make sure you do subscribe and hit the notification button so I can show you where these will be posted for you to download. And if you watch this tutorial and you're ready to try the recipe for yourself, you can print this full recipe and many more in Lesson 2 of the Thermal Mermaid Soap Makers course and resources and get full access to Lessons 1 through 10. Now if you're not a member, you can still print this recipe by joining the Thermal Mermaid Facebook group and find the free recipes in the Files link. Now let's get started adding salt to this luxury spa bar. Now you'll find dozens of ways to make a salt bar, and typically these bars are made as exfoliating or foot scrub bars depending on how much salt you add to the bar. Some recipes add as little as a tablespoon per pound of oils, and some have as much as 1 part salt to 1 part oil ratio. In this recipe, we'll start with the lye water solution of 18.24 ounces of cold distilled water with 6.77 ounces of lye crystals dissolved into the water. Once the lye crystals are dissolved, we're going to turn this into brine water. Now traditionally, brine water is soap made from seawater. However, seawater can have a variety of mineral inclusions, so to keep our recipe more pure, this will be our normal distilled water, and we'll add sea salt crystals to the lye water solution. To get a 20% salt to oil ratio in this recipe, I need to measure out 6.9 ounces of sea salt. The lye water is still hot, and I'm going to pour the salt into the lye water to help it dissolve more quickly. Now you may see other recipes where the salt is completely dissolved into the lye water to produce a clear brine. However, if you're using as much salt as we are in this water, it will never fully dissolve. The water is already holding almost 7 ounces of sodium hydroxide, and it can only dissolve so much salt before the solution becomes completely saturated. So at a certain point, the salt will no longer dissolve, and what's left over will end up dissolving into the oils in just a few minutes. This bar is a hybrid of 2 types. When salt is added to the lye water, it's traditionally called a Solesiefe bar. When the salt is added to the soap batter and the crystals are captured in the bar, this is a traditional salt spa bar. The Solesiefe bar is smooth and hard, while the salt spa bar can be rough and used as an exfoliant surface. This recipe is going to be a bit exaggerated. I'm going to make this in 2 layers in a slab mold. In the top half, I'm going to add 20% weight of salt to oils, and in the bottom half, I'm going to add 50% weight of salt to oils. This is going to give you a comparison to look at when we cut the bar, and you can see just how much of a difference it makes. Now with the brine water set aside, it's time to combine the oils. The largest portion of oil in this recipe is coconut oil. Now coconut oil is the only oil that will create bubbles in leather in salt water, and if we want this bar to bubble at all, it'll need to be mostly coconut oil. As a beginning soaper, you may have noticed that most cold process recipes keep the coconut oil to somewhere between 10 and 20% of the recipe. And you may have learned that coconut oil bars will just be too dry to use comfortably. Well, this is one of the features of coconut oil. So in this recipe, we've written in a 10% superfat. Now that means that we've added 10% more oil than can possibly combine with the lye. The 10% will not be able to saponify, but instead it'll just keep being oil and float in the bar. And this will keep a moisturizing feel to the bar and combat the drying attribute of the high percentage of the coconut oil. Here I've added the remaining salt that didn't want to dissolve into the oils, and it's time to mix this all together to bring it to emulsification. I'll be adding crystal blue waters from Nature's Garden to this recipe, It has a nice freshwater shower smell. It does not discolor, rice, or accelerate, so this fragrance won't alter the recipe that we're working with in any way. Next, it's time to split the batch into 2 parts. I'm going to color these slightly differently. 1/2 will get a teaspoon of Blue Lagoon mica, and this will be a nice pleasant blue, and the top half of the soap will get 1 teaspoon of Pearl Blue mica. Now this appears to be a similar color at first, but when it dries, it will become much lighter, and this will look nice with the embeds that we're going to put on top. Remember, we still want the bottom half of the soap to have salt crystals in the bar, so to get this to 50% content, we still need to add 30% more salt on this side. Here it's time to add another 5.6 ounces of salt. This time I'm adding kosher salt. This is the salt with the flat scales, and the texture is nice in a spa bar, but the kind of salt that you choose is entirely up to you. When making a salt bar, try to avoid using Epsom salts and bath salts. These are made with magnesium, and they're meant to dissolve quickly in soften water. They're a natural humectant, and then they draw moisture, which means they'll make your soap sweat and be sticky after it's cured. Sea salt, Himalayan salt, and kosher salt won't do this. It's time to pour the first layer into the mold. In a typical recipe, we would have 1.5 pounds of oils, but with the salt added, there are over 2 pounds of oils in the first layer. So these bars will look bigger than a standard bar of soap, but salt dissolves faster in the bath or shower, so a salt bar will usually not last as long as a fully cured bar of soap. You can see how quickly the recipe is setting up. You can see the contrast in color as I layer the top half over the bottom. Once these layers are completely spread out, I want to give it a little texture with the back of a spoon. The soap is already thick enough to do this in just a few minutes. Now for the decorations. It's time to sprinkle a layer of pink Himalayan sea salt over the top. The slab mold is 12 by 15 inches, so it'll be cut into 3 by 3.5 inch square bars, and I'm going to place seashell embeds in 2 rows across the slab. This way, when the bars are cut, each bar will be half covered in seashells. These little 1-inch seashells are the final embellishment on the top of the bar. Now there are several different ways you can add these shells to the top of the soap, all of which include making them beforehand in a small shell mold, and you can find a variety of these molds over on Amazon. The first way, as I've done here, is to make soap dough. Press them into the mold and let them sit for a few minutes. They're instantly ready, and you can get this little mottled look if you mold 2 colors together. Now, making soap dough isn't a beginner step, and if you want to try it, you can find the recipe in the next level of cold process in lesson 6.2. You have to make the soap dough several days in advance, but once you have it, you can make the little embeds almost immediately. The second way to make the embeds is to use a simple melt and pour. Now this is a pre-made base that you buy in a package, chop it up, melt it, and pour it into your embeds. And within a few minutes, they're ready to use. Now with this method, you can move right along with your project with no pre-planned projects ahead of time, but you will need to buy the melt and pour before you start the project. The third and easiest way if you're new to cold process is to make your embeds ahead of time by using the base recipe in lesson 2.1. This recipe will make perfectly fine embeds, but you'll need to give the soap time to set up. It won't take 24 hours for these little shells to set up, but it will take about 6 hours once you get them into the mold, and you'll find it easier to stick to one color, like just pink or just white, when you're first starting. And now that we've decorated, it's time to leave it alone to set. Here's a glimpse of what the pearl blue will look like after it's cured. It'll take a few days for the color to completely lighten. Now, unlike the previous recipes, we won't wait 24 hours for this recipe to set. Salt bars will get hard fast, and we want to cut them before they become too hard and brittle. So just after 6 hours, we're going to separate these into 12 squares. And here we have the up-close look of our finished product. You can get a glimpse of the layers on the side of the bar. Now the bottom layer has salt crystals captured inside, which the camera isn't picking up, but it is a contrast to the top layer, which is much more smooth and hard. Now these bars will still need to take the standard 4 to 6 weeks to cure, and once the water has evaporated, they'll end up very hard. Now this concludes part 5, our sea salt and brine bar. We're halfway through our 10-part tutorial, and coming up next, we're going to start getting more elaborate and delicate with our decorations and our designs in our soaps with our swirls. So we're going to start needing to change the recipe up. Instead of these thick trace recipes, we need to start moving toward our thin trace soaps. So the next 5 recipes coming up are more elaborate. Stay tuned. Next, we have a beautiful drop swirl.